Ladies and gentlemen, gather round. My name is Sally Buckley, your Engineering Experts Group host. And guess what? This is our 13th episode. I'm beyond thrilled that you've chosen to join us today. Trust me, you're going to love this interview with Dan Louis. We have a dozen podcasts just waiting for you. You can find them on various platforms, including YouTube. We're everywhere. Our mission is to celebrate and to pay homage to the geniuses in the world of engineering and construction. These experts share incredible stories, and we provide the platform to spotlight their achievements, to include members of their teams. I've had the good fortune of working on projects all over the world with my human resources background to support the teams in every capacity. I witnessed all the contributions to build these projects, and I focused on the people, just as we're doing on these podcasts. If you're enjoying this electrifying podcast, and I know you are, hit the like and subscribe button to help us to continue to expand globally. I'm very excited to introduce Dan Louis, who is a tunnel expert and known internationally. Dan is a graduate of Cal Berkeley with his bachelor's and master's degree in civil. I'm in awe of Dan's contributions and commitment and his incredible people skills. Welcome, Dan. I'm so excited that you said yes. What I'd love to do today is to start with your decision to go into engineering from Cal Berkeley, perhaps talk a little bit about your mentors, and then what we're going to do is take a kind of a road trip around the world to discuss your design and your construction contributions in the world of tunnels. And I'm so excited, and I'm grateful that you honored me with doing the work together before the recording to practice and to get to know each other again and to revisit the past. So the past meaning our work together at Bechtel Corporation. Anyway, thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Sally. This is a lot of fun. I'm kind of a little bit of a unusual in that I declared as a civil engineer right out of high school. I just thought that would be a good fit. I like solving problems, and as it turns out, I really enjoyed the program and getting the degree. And it's funny that whenever people ask me what my occupation is to this day, I could answer a number of different things, but I always answer civil engineer. That's at my core. That's at my core what I identify as.
Fantastic. So, Dan, you've got a big, huge, wonderful professional trajectory. Do you want to talk about your Glenwood Springs project? I think that would be a great starting point, don't you?
Well, yeah, I think that was my first big exposure to a tunnel project, because when I did come out of school, so I had this great professor at Cal, Tutor Perini, who was basically a tunneling expert, a Norwegian tunneling expert. And he was just such a big influence on my life and just exuded competence and confidence. I really just latched on to him. But I started out really in bread and butter geotechnical type projects, not in tunnels. So I got migrated into and finally got the opportunity to work on a really big tunnel project, the Hanging Lake Tunnels in Glenwood Springs. And then I've really never looked back since then. It was a tremendous experience. And I'm always thankful to Tor for giving me that guidance and helping me on that road.
Makes a difference when you have a mentor, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. And yeah, I didn't have to talk to him a lot, but he was the type of guy that you didn't have to use a lot of words, and you understood him well and always kind of followed his lead.
That's great. So then we're going to travel up to Colorado. How about that?
Yeah, so that was a great experience. That was really the first time the family, and we uprooted from the Bay Area and packed up and moved to Colorado with our first son was, 3 years old and went there. And it was really a great project in the middle of Glenwood Canyon. The highway itself has won numerous awards for the design to replace what was a very dangerous 2-lane road in Glenwood Canyon with a beautiful highway that was very scenic, allowed people to enjoy the canyon. And there were a couple of prominent tunnels, the biggest one being the Hanging Lake Tunnel that went right through the mountainside. So it was just a real marquee project for me, and a beautiful area too, just, in Glenwood Springs. So overall, it was just a great experience to kick off your career.
So could you tell us what kind of a project, what kind of a tunnel it was? Because I think that's what's going to be kind of exciting about your work in the tunnel business. What was that project?
Well, that project was an old school drill and blast job, but it was big, 42-foot diameter. And the rock was very challenging. So we had a lot of issues with supporting the rock as we were mining the tunnels. It wasn't as flashy as the TBMs, the tunnel boring machine projects that I got to work on later. But it was a great start. It was a great challenge. And, it led me to, I'm very thankful to that, because I used that project to submit the paper that ultimately I won the Harding Prize at the British Tunneling Society, and I delivered that paper in London, and that was a tremendous experience because everybody there really enjoyed hearing about the project and learning about it. So that was an amazing, positive experience.
So there were three of you that went over and were presenting, right? And you were chosen?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, they do the competition every year for engineers, young engineers, 33 or younger. And I just sort of on a whim, decided to write the paper and submit it. And I did get shortlisted. I got selected to come to London and deliver it. And then I ended up, and all three papers are delivered in front of the British Tunneling Society in the Institution of Civil Engineers, which is this incredible facility right down the street from number 10 Downing Street in London. It's just it's almost hard to describe. It's more like a museum than anything that you would think of from engineering. It just goes back so far. And then you're presenting to all the entire British Tunneling Society. So I was incredibly nervous, but like I said, it was very well received, and they ended up picking me as the winner. And so it was a tremendous experience.
It just, when I think about it, it helped probably your professional career, because it's just an outstanding thing. And for you to just do that, and you said that forgive me, on Woodward Clyde, you guys won numerous awards for the design, right? And you were you were working in the construction part of this project in Colorado. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I never worked on the design in this case. I was working out in the field, and it was also my first chance to get out from, doing design and engineering and really get into construction, which has also led me to, a lot of other projects on the construction side.
That's fantastic. So Dan, let's go to the purple line, because the red line in Los Angeles, because I think that was a pretty significant game changer for your career after 8 years out of Berkeley?
Yeah. So after starting out in geotech and then getting into the tunneling side and cutting my teeth in construction, I got the opportunity to go down to the Red Line and be a resident engineer on one of the tunnel contracts for the Red Line subway. And I guess the confidence I had gotten from some of those other projects gave me that opportunity. But I remember thinking, so it was another chance to meet a real great mentor of mine, George Morshauser, who I came cross paths with on many times in my career. And I remember interviewing with George and with Chris Dixon, who was another mentor of mine, and they hired me. And I remember telling my wife, I'm not sure why they're hiring me. I'm not sure I would hire me to take over one of these contracts. But as it turns out, George knew what he was doing, because it was a great learning experience for me. I think I was, it was a trial by fire, but I was successful doing it. And I know George feels that way. So it all worked out in the end, but it was an inauspicious start, because I wasn't sure whether I was really getting into something that I could handle or not.
Right. So what I did was since I worked for George and I knew Chris from Bechtel, I reached out to both of them to get a little reference check on you. So I'd like to take this opportunity to read what both gentlemen said about Dan as he was as he was working on the Red Line in Los Angeles. So let me just take this time to do this. So Dan Louis, I met Dan Louis this is George Morshauser, by the way, who's a very significant member of the Bechtel organization, senior vice president, by the way. Anyway, and he's no longer there. He's retired. But anyway, I first met Dan Louis in 1992 when he was hired to be a resident engineer on the LAC Red Line Segment 3. Dan had graduated from Cal Berkeley with a master's degree in geotechnical engineering a few years earlier and had been employed as a geotechnical engineer. The red line position was a construction focused and provided Dan with the opportunity to see engineering theory at work. The soft ground tunnel contract, which Dan was assigned to, had its share of challenges with surface settlement, water inflow, and running ground. Throughout the duration, Dan handled each issue, ensuring safety of the workers, traveling public, and infrastructure. He was professional at all times, articulated positions well, and based on contract documents. He knew when to seek advice and counsel and never became overwhelmed and treated everyone with respect. This was the start of a personal friendship and a professional relationship that had spanned 30 years. Dan continued to focus his career on tunneling. Dan and I worked together on numerous projects and sought each other's opinion on project issues and career opportunities over the years. Other people I know say Dan can always be counted on doing the right thing every time and has a unique 360-degree, forgive me, perspective on the issue, having experience on owner's team, design, and contractors. So one more accolade for Dan, and this is from Chris Dixon, and you'll learn about Chris when I read his testimony, which I think it's more of a testimony. I first met Dan in 1993 when I interviewed him for the position with Dillingham Construction on the Metro Red Line, where the Parsons Dillingham JV was the construction manager. I was very impressed with Dan, not only because of his education, but also because of the geotechnical and tunneling experience. More importantly, it was immediately apparent that Dan would be a good fit for our team, given his strong interpersonal and communication skills. Dan was assigned as a resident engineer for the North Hollywood Tunnel contract, which was technically challenging tunnel contract being performed by a difficult tunneling contractor. Dan excelled at managing the contract, his staff, and the contractor to achieve successful completion. Forgive me, in 1996. We worked, we worked together on the East Side Access in New York from 2001 to 2004. During the subsequent years, Dan and I kept in touch, discussing our separate career paths and using each other as a sounding board for respective decisions regarding potential opportunities. In 2019, when I was working as a project manager for Tutor Perini on the Metro Purple Line in Los Angeles, Purple Line for Tutor Perini, and in 2020, I retired, and Dan and I worked together during the 3-month transition period until Dan took over as project manager. And I've spoken with Dan several times, and I'm very pleased to know that things are working out well for Dan, Tutor Perini, and the project. I look forward to keeping in touch with Dan to see what his future path looks like. Just a reminder, the initial comments were about the red line, and Dan was just 8 years out of college. So Dan, you take it from there on the I keep saying purple, I mean red line, and share a little bit about your experiences, and then we can continue talking about other projects.
Well, yeah, you get a sense that both of those comments, it was great to hear all the positive feedback from them, but it was a very technically challenging and project that had a lot of claims. I learned how to be a very good letter writer in that job, and how to defend the contract and how to serve your client. So there was a lot of learning experience there that has served me well in the remainder of my career. So I thought it was a good, at first I thought it was a good transition to really learn the construction in the field better, but it really gave me much more experience to build on. So it was overall really, really positive. It was a difficult 3 years, but it's certainly great for my career.
Yeah, and you had a lot of litigation issues that you had to deal with. So you learned a lot along the way. This thing I find so interesting is your career trajectory didn't take you immediately right to design. It took you to construction, as I understand it. But then I think it's time, you're headed off to East Side Access, correct? Do you want to segue to East Side?
Well, before I
Oh,
got to
forgive me.
yeah, I joined Bechtel at this point. Actually, after that project
That's
is
right.
when
I'm
I
sorry.
first joined Bechtel, and that was going to Hong Kong
That's right.
on the West Rail job. So another remarkable transition, because now our third child, when we got on the plane to go to Hong Kong, our third child was 5 weeks old. And I remember my wife saying, a few weeks before that, saying, I can't go to Hong Kong. And she had just, after the baby was born, I said, well, what can we do? I already quit and took this new job. So, so we packed up and we went to Hong Kong, and that was a tremendous 3 years. That was in the formative stages of the project. So that was where Bechtel was the program manager, and basically we shepherded the project from initial conception through to launching the major design build contracts for construction. So it was at the front end of the project, but it was a great experience in a whole new environment. Really loved Hong Kong. And then from there with Bechtel went to Antamina in Peru. So that was another tremendous experience on a mining project. And a mining project is really like nothing else. I mean, it's not like a civil project at all, because it's operated under a bonus structure that it's very time sensitive. So you're under a tremendous pressure. It was a job, 14,000 foot elevation and camp job up in the Andes. So it was just another, that was construction where we formed the contracts, brought the contractor on board, and did what took years on some of these other projects, we would do in months on that job, because that's really just what was called for on a major mining project.
So you transitioned from the Bechtel rail sector, right? And then took this job in the mining sector, whole different, because I worked at Bechtel, whole different types of people. And you said it was time sensitive, very different contract agreements too, isn't it? Right?
All right. Yeah. The time frames are just so much different. And yeah, we had there were 3 tunnels on that job. And while we brought the contractor in to do the first tunnel, before we even had the second tunnel frame, decided how we were going to build it. And then when we got it designed and built it, the contractor that we had on board was, well, let's just say not very amenable with how he was pricing and planning the work. So just on the fly, we went to a different contractor that was already working on the site, and we ended up contracting for them to do the tunnel. So it's just that's the type of environment it is in the mining job. Basically all 3 of those tunnels were built by different contractors under different time frames, but that's what it took to get it done.
Yeah. Today I looked up the Antamina project that you were on, and it said that it was the largest mining project underway in Peru, US dollars 2 billion, and it was just an amazing undertaking. But I just want to talk to your audience about your acceptance of making changes, significant changes in your career geographically, and taking your family with you. But the other complex, I think, a complex to the story was your travel. You were on 21 days at a campsite and then 7 days with your family in Peru, correct? In Lima, forgive me, in Lima.
Yeah.
So take it from there. I mean, that is a big deal. And your wife said yes. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, my wife loved it, because my wife speaks Spanish and had been in the Peace Corps in Ecuador. So she and the kids really enjoyed Lima. There was a great American school there. It was not so great for me, because the bus ride was 10 hours each way. And so of those 7 days that I had off, 2 of them were basically consumed with this bus ride. I really only got 5 days a month down in Lima. It was very difficult, and really like nothing else I experienced before. Many of the other Bechtel folks on the mining jobs, they had done this on other jobs in Chile and and elsewhere, and they were very used to it. But it was a big adjustment for me, not so much for the family, but big adjustment for me.
Hey, Dan, can I just ask you a quick question? Just from a personal perspective or living situation, I don't think we talked about this earlier, but what was it like on the campsite? You know, how many people were there? Do you mind? And you're at a higher elevation, so it's temperatures are interesting. So could you just talk about what that lifestyle was like? Because you're talking to a lot of people that might be interested in doing these complex projects. Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly the positive aspect of it is that you're doing this very challenging project in a challenging environment. So it's very rewarding. Bechtel does everything they can, to make the camp as accommodating as possible. And when it started, the camp grew tremendously as the labor force grew, because we went up to 5,000 people at one point. But it started out as less than 1,000, in the first camp and then we moved the camp over to the mine processing site. So they do everything they can to try and make it, but it's hard. It's a tough environment, and because there's really not much else to do up there except work for 21 days straight. Mm-hmm. And it is very rewarding, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful setting, up in the Andes. That's for sure. I'll never forget that.
Then your project manager was on site was Bob Young, and then Bill O'Rourke was in San Francisco. I was probably in San Francisco when he was on the job. So anything to say about those guys and what it was like working with the team members that you can help have a little teaching experience with teaming. Yeah, teaming.
Well, I think on every job
right.
You need to find your mentor, find the people, and it's not always your boss every time, because sometimes bosses are better than others. I mean, I learned a tremendous amount from Bob Young on the site, because he was one of those grizzled veterans that had worked on these camp jobs over and over again, and very competent, knew what he was doing. He gave me a lot of guidance on a day-to-day basis operating in that mining environment. Ultimately, I tell the story because it's not always, peaches and cream on these jobs. I mean, eventually Bob, replaced me with he had a project manager coming free from another mining job in Chile, and he wanted to get him in. So I got moved on, which happens. It's not, the bright side for me was that's how I moved on to East Side Access, but. Okay. The reality is I was replaced before the job was done, and that's just part of life, part of working on these big projects, and just another example of the fast pace that they move at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you had to learn a lot. Keep moving on, right? And so you brought the family back to the United States from Peru to New York, right? You want to talk about New York now?
Yeah, so that was obviously
interesting.
A big transition, and gave me the opportunity to come back into rail and underground work, because East Side Access is this $10 billion underground program. And again, I got to be reunited with George Morshauser, who was the program manager there, and it was in the very early stages of the job in 1999. As a matter of fact, when I came on in the early stages, the budget for the job was like $4.5 billion, and the completion date was supposed to be 2009, by the end of 2009. Mm-hmm. And East Side Access just opened in March of 2023, March earlier this year. So it gives you an idea of some of the trials and tribulations for those mega projects. Yeah. But I was there for almost 10 years on that one project. So it was certainly a big part of my career, and there's nothing like working on a huge mega project like that has so many different facets. I mean, 30 different construction contracts over the span of the job, and so many great people on these projects. The trick is finding the great people, right, and then sticking to them, like George and like I worked very closely with Alan Paskoff there in New York, who was.
I remember Alan.
Yeah, and he came over from the construction side, from working forever for Kiewit, and so he was just a wealth of knowledge to me. I really enjoyed working side by side with him on that job, and you just got to find the great people like that and stick with them, and it helps you find your way on these projects.
So the other component to this project, which is interesting, you've got Amtrak and Long Island Railroad, and the complexity of dealing with the two agencies, or if that's what they're called. And you were on the Queens side you were working on the Queens project, right? Can you talk a little bit about what your role was specific to the tunnel work that you were doing? You were on the design side at this stage, yes?
Well, again, it was coming back into, I was on the program management team
Okay.
at the beginning stage of the project when it was in preliminary engineering and then eventually getting the final design done. Most all of the contracts were design bid build contracts.
Okay.
On that job. So initially I was shepherding and managing the design for the Queen segment for all the different contracts in the Queen segment, but then had the opportunity to see those contracts through the procurement phase and award, and then go out into construction. So then I transitioned out where I was the Queens area construction manager.
Okay.
Overseeing several of the initial projects. Were preparing, there was demolition work and site preparation work and a lot of rail prep, ultimately leading to the big tunnel contract where the 4 TBM tunnels mined under Amtrak's Sunnyside Yard. So that was that was sort of the marquee contract on the Queens area for East Side Access.
And just for your audience, TBM stands for?
Oh, tunnel boring machine, and those are sort of the cool elements of these projects, particularly the underground metros, where you're pretty much all you use cut and cover methods for the station sites, but all the underground work is using tunnel boring machines, which are these incredible $25-30 million pieces of equipment that mine through and set the lining right behind or whether it's soil or rock. In the case of East Side Access, it was a combination, but it was mostly soft ground, and in a tremendously difficult environment because of all the rail tracks above it, including the mainline Northeast Corridor tracks, which, if you shut down the Northeast Corridor, you're going to be on the front page of the New York Times,
right?
For sure. So that we always had that hanging over our head that you gotta make sure that everything's working and that these TBMs are cooperating. And fortunately, we had some very good contractors and great people doing that, so it all worked out well.
Dan, are these TBM machines made in the United States, or are they shipped from overseas? I don't remember.
Well, it's changed a lot over the years, but nowadays almost all of them are made in Germany.
Germany, right.
Yeah, there used to be a big manufacturer in Canada, but they got subsumed, and there are some in Asia. There's still some manufacturers in Japan and China that make them, but most of the ones here in the US now are made by Heron Connect in Germany. Certainly that's all the machines that we're using here in Los Angeles now.
Yeah. So, and just being in New York, I mean, that's complex, right? Anyway.
Yeah, that's like from coming overseas, that's like a whole nother
right?
overseas destination and a whole nother, settling in with the family. But, we were there 10 years. So a lot of our kids consider themselves New Yorkers now above anything else. That's where they grew up.
Pretty exciting. So when you departed from, we have one other thing to talk about in New York. Besides that, is there anything else you want to talk about on the project site before we switch over to your 9/11 experience?
Yeah, I think that gives you a pretty good overview of what it took on East Side Access. I did have the opportunity to work on a couple of little side jobs during that time, and one of them was 9/11 because we were there working in Manhattan at the time, and through Chris Dixon, who I mentioned earlier, and Alan. So the three of us actually started working at Ground Zero the next day on September 12th, helping out the Department of Design and Construction, which was a volunteer effort that Bechtel had organized. Ultimately led to Bechtel had as many as 10 people on the project, but Chris and Alan and I were the three that started it, and ended up working there for about a month, just really helping design. And the city's Department of Design and Construction was overseeing all the cleanup effort and working with the fire chiefs and the fire department, because they're, in the middle of that incredible experience. For me, it was particularly odd because I had never even been down to World Trade Center in my time living there. And so the first time I ever got there was on September 12th.
Wow.
But it was an amazing experience. I mean, I remember, early in the early days going, leaving the job site and going down to take the subway ride home. And I remember once going down and still wearing all my gear, my vest and hard hat and everything, and just spontaneously everyone on the platform starts applauding. And I've never gotten a standing ovation for doing my job. The people in New York were just totally behind that effort and totally engaged at that period.
I think we're all going to remember where we were that day, right? Or that next day and days after. But I just want to say thank you to that, because that's a big deal to accept that. Actually, you probably just jumped in, knowing you. You just said, okay, whatever's needed, right? You just do it. And it was a remarkable story. I just want to thank you for your contributions on that. This has been a fantastic story. I mean, it's just a fantastic story for your listeners, and also I'm not ending this, but I just want to stop for a moment and just look at the landscape of the experiences that Dan has presented, from working up in Colorado, Red Line in Los Angeles, going over to Hong Kong, Antamina, Peru. And then East Side Access, and helping out with the 9/11, which is remarkable, raising a family. And his lovely wife said yes to going to these different environments, which is fantastic. And Dan, from the East Side Access, now you were on the project for about 10 years. So what was your next assignment after East Side?
From there, we were kind of interested in finally making our way back to California. So that's where the opportunity came up. And I did a few things before, when we came back to California, before making my way to the Purple Line where I am now, and with Chris Dixon's help. I worked for 4 years for Samsung Construction, 2 years in Korea, and 2 years here in California. So that was an interesting experience, where Samsung was trying to get into the U.S. market. In Korea, I was helping them on all different overseas jobs, a lot of tunnel boring machine projects, including a project they won in Hong Kong, which was a lot of fun to get back to Hong Kong and do another project there. But then ultimately, after the experience with Samsung, I was able to hook back up with Chris Dixon and make my way to back into the metro projects and get onto Purple Line construction. And one of the interesting things that, from talking to you and kind of going over all this, was looking at the differences between East Side Access and Purple Line, because it's, East Side Access was really plagued with so many overruns and difficulties, but it really lacked a clear sponsor, because the project it was a one-off project. So it wasn't really done under an existing agency. They created an agency under that project, and that meant you sort of lost a champion, and it was difficult to keep focused. I think they got taken advantage of by a lot of the stakeholders, by the railroads, and that's one reason it just kept going on and on. But here in LA, where you've got a mature owner in LA Metro that cut their teeth on the Red Line, they know what they're doing now with the contracting, and the budgets and the timeframes are just much, much tighter. It's all really focused on getting these jobs built. We always have issues. I mean, we have our issues between ourselves and the owner, but in terms of keeping the project focused and on track, it's really working a lot better in this environment. So we're looking forward to getting these contracts done and then moving on to the next adventure.
And you're with Tutor Perini working on the purple line. And how long have you been on the project, and how many years in front of you?
Yeah, I've been here 3 years, and so right now I'm project manager on section 2, which has actually been going since 2017. So Chris Dixon was the project manager initially, up until he retired. But we've actually got another. We'll go into 2026, so we've got another less, 2 to 3 years more to go before this one's done, and then we also have 4 other contracts that we're working on for LA Metro right now that Tutor Perini has as well, that all with different time frames. So we've got a lot going on in the area, that's for sure.
I think one of the comments that you made was that I picked up on was you appreciated the maturity of the working with the agency, that, like you said, the working together and getting things done was quite a different process. I think that's a really important thing for a modeling, don't you? Because I worked on the Dulles project for many years under George Mershauser, as a matter of fact, and I'm not going to make any comments about that specifically, other than that it's up and running now, and it was a fantastic experience. But I understand the opportunity of working with these different agencies. You want to talk about that maturity piece in LA that makes a difference for you?
Well, the key thing there, I think, really is you've got to have a unity of purpose. You really,
There you go.
it just has to be very clear what you're all here building, and that is the advantage when you're working on these projects that are sort of better framed, better put together, and with this mature owner that really knows what they want to do. Again, it's not a picnic. We have all our issues that you have in construction and major underground projects, that's for sure. But you all have this unity of purpose of where you're going, and there's this focus on the end and keeping the end in sight. And that's why, so far, and that we're keeping tight schedule and tight budgets, and that'll be lead to a successful project.
Something else that's really important, I think, is that you commented comfortably about different mentors on the projects. And I think it's wise to keep sharing that with people, champions, mentors, people that have been there, been through the mistakes and the challenges. Don't you agree? Isn't that something you'd like to make sure that your listeners take that opportunity to ask for help, right?
Absolutely. It's a constant learning experience, and it's always that way. And that's why finding these mentors and finding these, great people that you have the opportunity to work with and honing in on them really helps you in your career. And I've been lucky doing that. I remember back on the Red Line back in the early days when another mentor in that project, who was my direct supervisor, Don Miner, this grizzled construction veteran. And it used to be so stressful sometimes just getting through some of the challenges. And Don could sense when I was, and I remember him telling me several times, he said, Dan, they always get built.
Yeah.
You just don't worry about it. You just stay grounded, keep pushing. They always get built. Because sometimes you feel like it's not. Sometimes you feel like it's this. How are we going to climb this mountain?
Exactly.
But you get the right people in your corner, and and another great mentor I worked with on a project, Shel Coudray, and one thing I really learned from him is he said, sometimes you just have to make a decision. Yeah. Any decision. You can't wait necessarily for it to be the perfect decision or necessarily the right. You got to make a decision, and that's the way construction is. There's really nothing else like it. That you just got to do the best you can, and sometimes you might not make the right decision, but it's better than no decision and the chaos that can go with it.
Yeah. Marvelous. I feel like I've just had the best experience with you, but I have to share something with the audience before we go. And I didn't plan this, but I just have to say something. I'm going to go back to Hong Kong. I was in San Francisco when you were in Hong Kong, and you were working with a wonderful project manager by the name of Tom McCarthy. He was PM on the job, correct?
That's
Or
right. Yeah.
director? What was? Yep.
Yeah. He
So,
was the head Bechtel guy we had there. That's right. Yeah.
yep. And Malcolm Snoddy, who I know, and Sterling Brisbane. And I'd just like to say, unfortunately, Sterling and Tom have passed away, but I had the opportunity to work with both of them. I worked with Tom in San Francisco. And one thing I'll never forget about Tom is when he came back from Hong Kong, he made sure every single day that I was working to help any expats that were in Hong Kong to help and make sure that they had jobs to go to or a place to land, whether it was back in San Francisco, if we didn't have anything, but every single person was accounted for. And I was helping with that. And I just feel really honored. And the other thing I feel just really excited about, Dan, you're just helping me to go back in time with all this, is that I work with Sterling Brisbane on the Ellis Corridor Metro Rail project here in Virginia. And he was head of the engineering design team for the project. What was it, $13 billion? I can't remember the amount of money. It was on the first phase, but he was just fantastic. And so what I love about these conversations is the crossing and I know that guy, or I understand what you learned, or I understand why that person might have been a good mentor for you. So it's been just a wonderful experience. I hope you don't mind that I went back to Hong Kong, but I just had to do a shout out for Tom and Sterling and all the gentlemen, the wonderful men that you've had connections with, professional connections with. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you want to say? Because I think we're good to go, and I just want to just give you an opportunity to say what you want to say about this beautiful summary. I love this. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks for bringing up Sterling, because he was another mentor. Certainly, I worked with him both on Hong Kong, where I worked directly for him, and then when I came back to East Side Access in New York, that was with Sterling. And
Oh,
we
that's
could
right.
we could probably do a whole podcast on just the different, Sterling's unique approach to the work, and he's definitely going to be missed. He was certainly a great mentor, and I learned a lot, and a brilliant mind. I mean, just an incredibly gifted engineer.
Yeah.
One thing I learned from Sterling, I think that's always kept with me too, is that I think it was Sterling that taught me bad news doesn't get better with age. So if something's wrong, don't you got to address it head on. Don't try and hide it or ignore it. And I've always tried to live that way as well. So you take these bits and pieces of advice from all these mentors that you've got, and you take it and work with it. And I think that's the way I've certainly lived my life and managed my career. And obviously you've heard through this that you also just can't be afraid to say yes. I guess that's the other thing I would say to young people, that it's not easy. It's not easy sometimes to go into the field and get dirty and get into the construction side. And it's not easy to pick up and move and try new experiences, but we've never regretted it. We've never regretted taking on these opportunities and learning to learn and grow with them. So it's been a tremendous experience.
Yeah, and all the people that you've hooked up with. And I remember starting at Bechtel in San Francisco and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't think I slept for 17 years. I don't think I did, because there was always something going on, and I learned so much, and I have a lot of gratitude for that. So Dan, thank you. And what I would like to say is, obviously that Dan is a fantastic mentor, and Dan's on LinkedIn, so please hook up with him and maybe ask some questions, or it's just really important to connect in. But all of you that are listening, and particularly those that might be young engineers or just starting out, or mid engineers, just make sure you seek a mentor and ask for help along the way, because you guys are creating this incredible world for us. And that's where I get to say thank you through the podcast. So, Dan, thank you so much for your gracious time. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the people that are listening will also appreciates your hard work around the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sally. Yes, happy to do it.
All right, Dan.
And by all means, people happy to help out along the way, for
All
sure.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.